once again into the fray. I believe as Christians, I believe as we look at things, this is the last good battle that we'll face. I believe the return of Jesus Christ is imminent. Everything is lining up for Jesus to come and for us to go home. Until then, there's work to do. In 2023, March of 2023, in fact, George Barton came out with a report, and in it he talked about the decline of the percentages of Americans that have a biblical worldview. At one point it was 6%. It dropped to 4%. What's even more troubling, only 1% of 18 to 29-year-olds have a biblical worldview. These numbers should frighten us. In fact, they do. I look at them and I'm stunned. I'm absolutely stunned. When you look at the fact that in our country, probably most households have a Bible somewhere, and 270 million claim to be Christians here in the United States. The problem, reality has been diluted. Reality has been diluted, and truth has been compromised. And I'm not talking just in culture, I'm talking within the church as well. He says there are 7 cornerstones to a biblical worldview. And if you don't have all 7, then you don't have a biblical worldview. There's no grays, black and white on this. And they're not hard. They're not difficult things. They're things that cross denominational lines. So I want to share them with you tonight. Number 1, have an orthodox biblical understanding of God. God's the creator, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, omnipresent, and thank you. Have a biblical understanding of God. All humans are sinful by nature. Every choice we make has moral considerations and consequences. Number 3, knowing Jesus Christ is the only means to salvation through the confession of sin and reliance on his forgiveness. Amen. Say that today. Quote John 14:6 in a place to say that Jesus is the only way. He is. Those are his words. There's only one way. There's no exception. That's it. That the entire Bible is true, reliable, and relevant, making it the best moral guide for a person in all situations. Absolute moral truth exists, and those truths are defined by God, described in the Bible, and are unchanging across all culture and time. 6, the ultimate purpose of human life is to know, love, and serve God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And 7, success on earth is best understood as consistent obedience to God. That's in thought, that's in words, and that is in actions. He goes on to describe how 80% will take maybe 1 or 2 of those truths, and that's what they hold on to, 80% of adults. 20% reject them altogether. When it comes to 18 to 29-year-olds, just again, 1% agree to all 7. The rest, they kind of have a syncretic view of God, where they'll pick and choose the things that they want to believe.
Ezekiel, being a leader, a prophet, who felt the call of God and knew, and God told him it was his responsibility to warn the people of sin. And if they did not warn, if he did not warn them, then the blood of them would be on his shoulders. If he warned them and they didn't repent, it was on their shoulders. But they had to be warned. And so, I went through the whole thing there. I talked about the Gideon army, how they were reluctant to serve. Gideon was reluctant to lead, and yet God gave them just a couple simple instructions on how to be faithful. First thing they needed to do, when the trumpet sounded, they were supposed to break their gourd and then make a little noise and let God do the rest. I don't know why we are so afraid of speaking truth today, for fear of the repercussions that we may. I actually wrote an article into my local paper, and I was really surprised that they printed it. And I said, I think that we have allowed tolerance to decay our moral because we're afraid of offending, and there's just more and more that offends people, and we try to be so careful, but the reality is our tolerance is destroying America. We need to stand up boldly. And so I reminded these legislators that they were called to lead, they were called to stand, and when they start voting on things that expand the addictions to people, like alcohol, marijuana, gambling, I said, you guys are doing exactly the same thing as Belteshazzar did when he stole or Nebuchadnezzar stole the gold and silver from the temple, and they were praising the gods of gold and silver. You guys are doing the same thing, bringing money into Kansas on the backs of families. And I said, I don't care if you're mad at me, because I'm telling truth, and that's what I'm called to do. And they asked me to open the House chamber with prayers. Well, then the next week, I get this call from a pastor in Dodge City. His name is Mark Powell. I'd never met him, never attended a church in Dodge City, but he said, I want you to come out, I want you to talk to some people in my church, and I want you to tell them what you told the legislators. And I'm trying to figure out how in the world did he even know what I told the legislators, but that's no problem. So, I agreed to go, and I went to a luncheon. I was expecting maybe 9 to 13 pastors there that might be joined together. It turned out to be 80 people, and they were from all the different churches. They had announced it on the radio that I was going to be there, and I just gave them the same thing. But I said it was church leaders. It's pertaining to church leaders, people in the church who are supposed to be serving God, should be bold in their faith. They should be bold in pointing out the sin of the people. And so then had lunch, and I headed back home, and then Mark sent me the sermon that he gave the next Sunday, and it was straight out of Romans 1, the sin of homosexuality. And during the course of his sermon, they ran up and grabbed the phone away from him. 4 of them left the church in anger. They came to Wichita to get Nola Folston's law firm to put out a restraining order on him that he couldn't even step back in his church without getting charged with trespassing, because he was faithful. That's a pretty sad story, but you know what made me the most sad? If you know Mark Powell, he's got this soft-spoken, gentle voice. He's not one that pounds on the pulpit or anything, but he was just speaking truth. But the thing that bothers me the most is when he got attacked, how many people stood up for him? How many people stood up with him, beside him? How many were afraid? Tony actually was involved in a hearing one time in the Capitol, and it was very divisive. Black Lives Matter actually went against him, and so I called security and I said, I want to have a place for the legislators to sit on the front row to encourage the people, the bold people that are testifying. And there were 5 of us that showed up. And you and Ron Highland were both speaking. You were testifying, so there were only 3 of us that showed up, and the rest of the room was packed. Besides the people on the hearing, with people that were rowdy and just, when Tony got up to speak, they were glaring, and so I'm just really praying for him through the whole thing, because they wanted to target him. How dare he stand up? And so anyway, that I learned a lot that day, that the legislators were afraid to show up. They were afraid of collateral damage. And we can't let that happen in our country. The first battle that was fought for our freedom from Great Britain was actually led by a pastor. So think about that. He took off his robe and was a part of the regiment that went out, and he led the charge against Great Britain. So the reality is, it is time to stand. We are in a culture war. We do know who wins, but the question is, will we be faithful? Will we be a Dietrich Bonhoeffer? when I think about all the pastors that were in Germany at the time, and I think we have some of the same congregations in America that they did there. Dietrich Bonhoeffer's name is the only one that I know. And it went down in history, and he did sacrifice his life. Martin Luther sacrificed his life to stand against the things that he saw wrong with the Catholic Church. But, I mean, what does that matter? What is momentary inconvenience in this life compared to eternity in heaven? And I want to enter there without having a guilty conscience that I could have done more. So that's kind of pretty well sums it up. I was going to quote the same quote that you quote, because Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Yeah.
Okay. Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act.